Welcome to In the Oil Patch, presented by SHALE Oil and Gas Business Magazine and sponsored by Steer. In the Oil Patch is where together we learn and explore topics that affect us all in oil and gas, business, and in your community. Every week, our host Kim Bellato, along with me, Alvin Bailey, will visit with the movers and shakers in this fast-paced industry. You'll hear from industry experts, elected officials, and many more right here on In the Oil Patch.
Welcome to In the Oil Patch Radio Show. I'm your host today, Kim Bellato. I want to bring on one of our resident energy experts, Tom Mullikin. Tom, welcome back to In the Oil Patch Radio Show.
Thanks, Kim. It's great to be back and be a part of this very important conversation.
Well, you know, last week we had you on to discuss the Paris Climate Agreement and President Trump pulling out. I really think that it's important that we all gather as much information on what is really happening versus what we're being spoon-fed, if you will, out in the main media. And so I wanted to bring you back on because, you know, last week when we had this whole discussion about what was really occurring, boy, our lines and our social media platform was pretty busy. And so obviously to me, that says that there is a whole lot of information that people are seeking versus just going to the main media and being, you know, told more or less what this seems like. So a few days have passed since President Trump announced his decision to withdraw from the Paris Agreement. And we've seen on both sides, some people are very much for it, some are against it. And it kind of appears as though the United States internationally is, they're not too happy with this. So I'd like to ask you, with all of the international countries weighing in, they're not very happy, a lot of them, with the United States and their decision. So my question to you is, where do you think that leaves the United States? And also, there's been a lot of discussion with these climate deniers. So how bad do you think the decision for President Trump to pull out from the Paris Climate Agreement has been for the United States? I want to get your opinion now that there's been both sides that have kind of weighed in.
I fully support the president's decision to withdraw from the Paris Agreement. And I would say that sometimes leadership is a lonely place. What the United States has begun to do over the last 14 years, where we've shown about a 10% reduction in our greenhouse gases, as we've begun to demonstrate what real leadership looks like, and that is finding that environmental sustainability and economic sustainability can survive together. And that really is the only leadership position, because people will not do what they can't afford to do. So this idea that this has been a bad decision, this is about my third iteration of this, Kim. You know, we had the Kyoto Protocol, which pretty universally now it's been agreed that is a defective instrument. But for years, it defined the environmental conversation. If you were for the Kyoto Protocol, you were for the environment. If you were opposed to it, you were opposed to the environment. Then we went through about another 10 years of that being cap and trade, which people now generally agree that that's a very bad idea to put a price on carbon, and that defined the environmental conversation. And now here we are again with Paris. But each of these different concepts seem to overlook one very fundamental principle in that. We have only one atmosphere. And if we move emissions from nations that have very comprehensive and rigorous environmental standards that are enforced, greenhouse gas emissions go way up, and so do listed pollutants. So I believe the president's decision was wise, and I think that what we'll do is continue to develop market-based solutions, and we'll continue to see technology driving an initiative that will reduce the U.S. anthropogenic interference.
Well, and Tom, I want to go back because I want to know your thoughts on, is it possible for the United States to reduce greenhouse gases, our footprint, while not endorsing the Paris Agreement?
Absolutely. And I think that we'll see that as we have more informed conversations on how to reduce not just our greenhouse gases, but how to reduce our overall environmental footprint. And what we've seen is that where we've had technology has developed, we've seen greenhouse gas emissions go down, as well as other listed pollutants, as well as other different types of waste streams. In this country, we've seen dramatic reductions in greenhouse gas emissions because of the development of horizontal drilling or hydraulic fracturing in the use of natural gas. We've seen where market-based solutions have had a dramatic impact on reductions of our gases, and we're going to continue to see that. But the first thing that people have to understand is, what are those gases, what are the sectors, and what are the sources? Sustainability studies. I think it's fascinating to see mayors weighing in now, talking about what they're going to do. And, what I would say to those mayors is, where you been? This conversation's been going on since 1992.
Exactly. Why did it take so long for you guys to start doing what you needed to do? And maybe it's that they should have been doing this all along. So Tom, your point is that we can achieve meaningful environmental sustainability and reduce a lot of the pollutants in the planet if we basically start working with one another, as opposed to just having jobs transfer from the United States into other up-and-coming countries and funding them to actually do the right thing. That we can achieve this together. We just probably started with the wrong, failed agreement. Which leads me into my next question. Since Trump pulled out, conservative pundits have pointed out that Paris supporters should be focusing their anger on President Obama, who, by the way, did not seek to ratify this by Congress, the treaty. So tell me your comments on the aspect of this debate.
I would say that succinctly, Kim, this agreement will be devastating to the economy. It's constitutionally defective in this country because the president failed to bring this proposed treaty before the Senate, which is required under Article 2, Section 2 of the United States Constitution. And I think it'll be bad for the environment. It just simply is going to move emissions from regulated nations to unregulated nations. And we now have 20 years of data to demonstrate that since Kyoto. This is the 20th year anniversary. When we left the Earth Summit in 1992 in Rio, that framed the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC, where it talked about bringing all the nations together, and went to Kyoto, where it divided the world up almost in half. The year that instrument was drafted, it wrote out 48% of global greenhouse gas emissions. We then started on a faulty foundation. That agreement this Paris is built along those same lines of bifurcating the world up into developed and developed. We will definitely move jobs. We'll move emissions. And in China, the carbon intensity is nearly twice what it is in the United States. It has failed on virtually every level: economic, constitutionally, and environmentally. We can do much, much better.
So what is your opinion then, that we need to start over with a new agreement that is basically built with a good foundation on discussing, okay, they're not emerging countries, well, they may be, but they have issues with trying to figure out how to deal with all of the pollutants that they're putting in the planet, and they need to be brought in just like the United States at the same time, since they are truly, huge emitters of pollution, all different types of pollution. I think the other thing that I want to just mention is the fact that why didn't President Obama go to the Senate and bring this before the Senate? Was it because it was so flawed, and this is why we have this, debacle right now, is because it would have never gotten through the Senate? It was such a poor plan?
It's hard to imagine it would have gotten the votes that was necessary, just like Kyoto did on the test vote that was taken on Kyoto. It wasn't a partisan vote. It was 98-0.
So where do you think we need to go then? I mean, obviously we have to do something. Doing nothing is not an option either.
The climate has changed throughout all of time. We've seen more extreme weather systems. I mentioned I'm the commander of the State Guard here in South Carolina. We've had 2 hurricanes within 1 calendar year with $2 billion worth of damage. We need to understand how the climate is changing. We need to develop adaptation and resiliency plans. I've done in our office a fair amount of climate anthropology research, demonstrating how climates have helped and have helped hurt different national sovereign issues. We need to understand that, and then we need to determine how best to inject economic sustainability into this conversation, because, as I say, people will not do what they can't afford to do. We need an informed conversation. I'd like to be able to talk to one zealous advocate in Congress for reduction of greenhouse gases and have them answer this one question. What are those greenhouse gases? I've never had one answer that. The 6 greenhouse gases that we're looking at and others. And then the sources and sectors. This is a conversation that requires a certain level of understanding. It's complex. And we'll bring a surgical instrument to it, Kim. We talked about you need to start with a couple of fundamental building blocks. First, we only have one atmosphere. So if what we do in moving emissions from the United States to China makes global emissions worse, we haven't helped the problem. The second is we need to understand that we can't divide the world up into these developed and developing. It's better that we have a smaller goal that's achievable by the whole world. And then we need to begin to find strategies where we can reduce. The work that I've done for industry has demonstrated that where we could take a surgical instrument, we can reduce the various gases, carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide, methane, and the 3 synthetic gases. We can go in and we can find ways to reduce and to apply developing energy sources. But what we can't do is what we can't afford to do. And we can't take for an energy-intensive manufacturer that may be paying anywhere from $2 to $5 million a month and take them off 3 or 4 cent power with natural gas and put them on 13-cent wind power. We've got to find that continuum that allows for us to have a reduction that's meaningful and sustainable, and we can do it. And Kim, that is the leadership position, is finding that place.
Right. Well, Tom, we are out of time this week, but I do welcome you to come back next week and figure out where are we at with this talk. But if there is one thing that I will close with is that President Trump does seem to want to find where is this bridge, how do we make this happen, even though the first proposal didn't work because it was not set up to benefit America. Obviously, going back to the drawing board and seeing where else we can find commonality and helping our one planet is a really good idea. So I'm hopeful that other countries will come to the table here within time. Tom, thank you. That's all the time we have for today. Look forward to speaking to you again next week and touching base on the Paris Climate Agreement and where we are.
Thanks, Kim.
Thanks, Tom, for being a guest on In the Oil Patch Radio Show.